welcome everyone to Kayaking 101. This is kind of a little bit of an intro to some of the kayaking that you can do in the area, and really kind of a little bit of sharing some of our expertise and our insight into kind of things that we love to do in terms of kayaking. So I will caveat that this is not a, once you take this, you are now officially like an expert at kayaking or anything like that. This is also something that is not like, oh, like, you know, all COVID restrictions are lifted and this is all good. So we always recommend that you check in with the area, with what's open, with what's like currently best practices. But this is just supposed to be an introduction and kind of showing you some of the things that you can do to look into or to get out there and try and do some kayaking. So I'll just start with my introduction. So I'm Rebecca Galban. I'm a fourth year in material science, and I'm one of the WISE Outdoor committee leaders. So I have historically done a lot of hikes and camping trips, but I also am an avid lover of the ocean. So I actually do a lot of scuba diving and kayaking as well. And I'll pass it off to Camille, who's my other speaker today.
Hi, thank you, Rebecca. So as Rebecca just said, my name is Camille, and I am also a fourth year material science student. So Rebecca and I actually have gone on some of our adventures together, which has been great. And I actually was a kayak guide for about a year. I guess it was more like 7 months. I actually took my quote unquote gap year and served as a kayak guide for ocean kayaking specifically, but it has been a while since I've been ocean kayaking, so rules may have changed since then. But I hope I can give you an introduction into kayaking and get you excited about it, because I had a lot of fun during that year. All right, next slide, please, Rebecca. All right, so presumably you are here because you want to either learn how to kayak or learn where to kayak in LA. So as a catch-all, we are going to start off with a welcome to kayak, beginner, intermediate, or advanced. There is a place in LA for you to explore, such as this cave. But before we explore options, we do have to go over just some general things, and I think the basics are on the next slide. So the basics that I'm going to introduce are a kayak. What are the different types of kayaks? Because there are actually quite a bit. Paddles actually vary, not only in material, but how you hold them and their position, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Generally, it is recommended that you have a water-friendly, what I'm going to call a go kit, if you are not on a tour, which again will be addressed later, and then some personal and safety essentials that you should never go on the ocean or on the lake or in a river with a kayak without. Okay, so these are some of the different types of kayaks. This is not all inclusive, but I'll go over these different types and some kind of notes on like when you might want to use one or the other. So the first that I'm going to talk about is a sit-in kayak. This is recommended for people who are going on calmer water. So for example, I'll be talking about canals later on, or some lakes that I believe Rebecca will be talking about. These generally have this kind of dug-in seat, and that prevents water from getting in to the kayak. It also does make it harder to get water out if you get water in the kayak. So great for calm waters, and for maybe rougher oceans or maybe even longer trips, there are sit-on kayaks. And these, as you can sort of see from the picture, have little holes in them. So this means water is constantly coming in and coming out. It does make you a little bit colder. So if you're kayaking in colder weather, maybe bring a wetsuit or something. But you do have the option now of, if you get wet, it will just drain. So you don't have to worry about if you flip or anything like that, or you have waves crashing into you. You can kind of just move through it. A touring kayak is actually generally used for longer trips. They generally are very long, generally are sit-in, not always. But these are more for intermediate to advanced users who are looking for, say, going to Catalina Island or something like that, if they have a nice day. And this last category is inflatable. They actually have like foldable ones too, where you can fold into a a backpack basically for easy transportation. The newer inflatable kayaks are actually wonderful because they, as you can kind of see from this picture, look very similar to the regular sit-in kayak. So they actually are getting significantly more advanced in terms of materials, and they can do almost everything a regular kayak can do. So one of the things I would also like to do is you do not have to buy your kayak initially. And if you want to try all these different types of kayaks, REI actually has reopened their watercraft rentals. So call them, make an appointment, and you say, hey, I want to try out an inflatable kayak, I want to try out the sit-on kayak. And their rates are quite competitive, especially if you are an REI member, and even if not, I think an entire day is something along the lines of $13 plus like some deposit. So it's really not a bad price for an entire day, as you'll see later on. Okay, the next thing is paddles. I'm going to kind of skip over the different types of materials and just go into the matched versus feathered. So in the matched, you can see the purple paddle is the actual paddles themselves are parallel. They are not offset with respect to each other. And then the feathered, you actually have an offset of an angle. And this will depend if you are what we call a high angle paddler or a low angle paddler. And I actually, as you can kind of see from the watermark, I kind of reproduced this plot from a website that I happen to like that I think illustrates very well the differences in high and low angle paddling just visually. And if you are going for a longer ride, you usually do want to use a lower angle paddle. So that would be perhaps something like the matched. And then if you want feathered, there's actually more power behind it because you can kind of rotate your shoulder a little bit more and get more power behind it as you push forward. So these are just kind of things to look out for. Really, it is your preference as to what you want to use. These are just, it's knowledge for you to kind of know that you have options. Almost all kayaking paddles that will come with rentals especially will have a way for you to change between matched and feathered. So I do encourage you just see what works best for you. All right, so some things that I would recommend to go in a quote unquote go kit, a dry bag for anything that you want to keep dry, perhaps something like food, water, which we'll get to a little bit later below. I do recommend that you have water shoes or strappy sandals or something like that, because if you do happen to tip over your kayak, it's very easy to lose a shoe. And sometimes people do unfortunately throw and leave glass in the lake or river or wherever you are. Swimsuit, again, highly recommended unless you have very fast drying clothing. A wetsuit, especially if you're kayaking in colder waters. A rain jacket is always just a good idea to have for wind, water, etc. Quick dry towel, sunglasses and hat. Usually you are for some length of time in the sun, and then food and water. And this little, I know you can't see my mouse unfortunately, but the bottom right panel in this diagram is actually a specially designed kayaking cooler. And you can put food and water in there. And I believe these are also available to rent. I don't know if they're currently available with COVID, so that would be something to check on. Okay, so I saved this for last because this is probably, aside from the kayak, one of the most important things that you need to bring. Almost all rental places will require that you have a life vest. You do not have to wear it while you are on the craft, but it is required that you have it with you. And again, this is not a catch-all rule, but every place I have worked, every place I have attended, they just say you need to have it on your person. You do not have to be physically wearing it. The bilge or the excess water pump is especially good for those sit-in kayaks. So if you do happen to get water in one of those and you are in a position where you can just get out, so you're in the middle of a lake, you can't just get out, you're going to need something to get that water out, and this is the easiest way to do it. Just general good things to have: a whistle, map, first aid kit, a patch kit, especially if you have a inflatable kayak. I believe I put sunscreen on the other one too, but never hurts to have more than enough sunscreen. Any medications you might need, because you can kayak for many hours at a time. and a flashlight. Most people kind of question, why do you need a flashlight if you are just going kayaking? Well, sometimes people are going in the wind, or I guess with the wind on the way out, and they don't realize they're going to have to fight the wind coming back, and they stay out after dark. So it's just always a good idea to have just in case. All right, so without further ado, I will let Rebecca start on the where to kayak in LA.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to give a quick, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, if you do have questions, feel free to either send them in the chat or to just speak up. We're happy to answer them as we're going along. But Camille gave a really great introduction of things to think about and things to remember and to look for when you're going. You can do kayaking at all of these locations, both on your own where you're renting gear or you're bringing your own gear, but these also all have tour options. So there are some tours that are currently running. Not all of them are, but oftentimes with tours, you can also check and see what they're providing and what you're going to need to bring. So some of the stuff is always good to bring on your own regardless, like usually they don't provide food, but some things they may provide or may not require in terms of you being part of the tour. So we've kind of highlighted 4 different locations that you can really kind of get a sense of the different types of kayaking that you can do in the area. So I'm going to use my little pointer here. So if we're looking in more of the LA close area, there is a river. It is called the LA River, and you can go kayaking on it. There are, I'll talk more about all of these specific locations later, but the LA River is a great place to go kayaking, and it is quite local. There's a lot of beachfront kayaking and marinas that you can go kayaking in all along kind of the LA. Most of them are within, I would say, about 30 minutes to an hour and a half, so they're a little bit greater distance. And then the 2 further away kind of kayaking options that I've highlighted are these open ocean kayaking, which is around the Catalina and Channel Islands, as well as lakes. So up by Mammoth Lake, there's a lot of different options in terms of doing some lake kayaking. This is not all of the kayaking options in Southern California, but just a few that we wanted to highlight for you. And in particular, I'm going to start with the LA River. So the LA River, pretty close by. There's several different options for guided tours. Typically, they're about an hour and a half, cost about $75. Not all of them are running due to COVID right now, but I've listed 2 here that I think are pretty good. And there are several other companies that run them as well. You can also go and portage your own kayak onto the LA River through 2 different designated locations. And so these are designated kind of water public access points. One is in the Elysian Valley zone and one is in the Sepulveda Basin zone. But these are only open May till September. So it's actually already closed for the season. But if you go on to kind of the LA, basically you can search LA River, but they have a LA Recreation website that has the details about what you can and can't do when they're open and some of the stuff if you are interested in kayaking on the LA River. So the LA River is a little bit notorious for not being necessarily the greatest river in the world, but it is surprising and kind of cool that there is still a lot of wildlife, and especially as they've been taking better care of the river, some wildlife is coming back. So there's actually a good deal of birds, from hawks to cranes, that you can see along the river, and there are portions of it that can have a little bit of some choppy water, which is always fun to kayak through, and there is actually a good deal of green. There are some parts of it that are kind of concrete and you're going under a road, but it's a really cool mix of some nature, but also some urban and kind of unique urban kayaking. If we're thinking about lakes, a little different than the rivers, but somewhat similar. By Mammoth Lakes, there is a large number of lakes that you can go on. They're beautiful, they're gorgeous, and they've got gorgeous scenery. So I do recommend, if you can or ever do get up to the Mammoth Lakes area. I've circled 3 spots that are particularly of interest. So Lake Crowley on the right here, a very large lake, and they actually have these really cool structures. I don't know if you can see, but they've got these like geological pillar formations and other things like that that you can go kayaking around the lake to. There are tours as well as points you can just rent kayaks and directly take them into the lake. Over on the left is Mary Lake and the 10 Lakes Basin. So this is right by Mammoth Ski Resort. And it basically looks like this. So you've got these just very nice, pristine mountain lakes. Most of these lakes are a little bit more about the view and a little bit less about the wildlife, but you can definitely still see some of the wildlife. And if you want to go fishing, if you're a person who likes fishing, you can do kayak fishing at Lake Crowley. So Lake Crowley is a fishing spot in general, but they also let you do fishing off of kayaks there. So if you'd like to try fishing and kayaking combined, I would recommend Lake Crowley. Convict Lake, sorry, that one's Convict Lake, which is not the nicest name for a lake, but Convict Lake is good for kayak fishing. So another area of interest is beachfront. So now we've kind of moved from the rivers and the lakes to something that's a little bit more ocean-based. And some of the wildlife that you might see in addition to humans is these sea lions. So they're pretty fun. They hang out there. But there's 4 different beach areas that beachfront areas we're going to talk about: Marina Del Rey, Alamitos Bay, Huntington Harbor, and the Newport Back Bay. And I'm actually going to let Camille say some details about those.
So what I've done for these is, because ocean kayaking does vary in intensity and length, I've tried to kind of break these down into like beginner to advanced kayaking and just some general places where you can get rentals. All of these shown here, with the exception of one, which I will explicitly state, are or have been confirmed to be open during COVID. And I've also listed just some general like prices that rentals start at. And usually these prices are per hour and for a single kayak. It is possible to get a 2-person kayak. I forgot to mention that earlier. So we'll start with Marina Del Rey. And the most popular place to launch kayaks is at this place called Mother's Beach by the locals. And I actually do think you can launch motorboats off of this as well. So just be a little bit cautious with when you're getting your kayak into the water. But this is mostly calm waters, so you can still see some wildlife. We have some seals down there, but it actually is a man-made kind of like ocean lake area. So great for beginners, and it's the first one on here for that reason. 2 of the currently open renting shops are the Pro Stoop Shop and the Marina Del Rey boat rentals. And so you can kind of just kayak around here, enjoy the views. Since this is man-made, I don't think there's a lot in terms of like seaweed or wildlife, but it's a great place to get acclimated and just kind of figure out what you can do on a kayak. All right, so next up is Alamitos Bay, and you can either go into the ocean, which is a little bit more intermediate, or you can venture into the nearby canals. And these canals actually do go in between houses, so you'll see some people on their boats hanging out or whatever. And this is definitely a more relaxed kind of beginner type. You're not really at risk of capsizing your kayak in a canal. But if you do, it's great. You just get back in your kayak and you don't have to worry about a wave hitting you, which is something that you will have to be aware of, not necessarily nervous of, but just be aware of the waves if you are going into the open ocean. So I could only find one place that was currently open called Kayaks on the Water. This is actually a pretty good rate for $12 an hour. Again, this is the starting rate for a single kayak, and just kind of go where you want to. You can see pelicans on this. I believe this one here is a brown pelican. So there is definitely wildlife to see here. You will see some seaweed, possibly some nudibranchs, which are basically these really cool sea slugs, and some kelpfish and crabs. Okay, so Huntington Harbor, this one actually I did a beginner to advanced rating because again, you can stay in canals, which is kind of exploring houses again. I actually don't know which of the 2 is closer. I should probably know that. But the interesting thing about this place is you can actually paddle the 22 miles to Catalina Island. So if you do have one of those longer touring kayaks, you can actually go to Catalina Island on your own power. You might want to stay overnight if you do 22 miles in a kayak on a day. It's actually a lot longer than it sounds, I promise. But there are many places to rent that are currently open because Huntington Harbor is such a popular area. So OEX Sunset Beach is open. I couldn't find starting rates for those. You do have to watch a preventative safety video before you can actually get to the rental site. So that is something. They are taking COVID precautions for that. Sunset rentals, rates start at $18, and then Huntington Harbor boat rentals. And this bottom picture here is actually some people that have gone to Catalina Island on kayaks. I don't know if they were brought there on the ferry and brought them along with them, or if they actually kayaked the entire way themselves. But it's beautiful there, and you can find this very unique type of fish called the Garibaldi there, and it's bright orange. Okay, and the last place that I would like to talk about is Newport Bay, and it's very estuary-like. You have a lot of the kind of herons, egrets, the kind of almost like land water birds. You have a mixing of fresh and salt water, which is kind of great. It does mean you have to worry about the tide coming in and out, so just be aware of the water. If you are inclined to go on a tour, just so you can learn more about the conservation and probably more about the wildlife than I would know, is the Newport Aquatic Center or the Newport Bay Conservatory. They take you on tours of either the back bay or even, I believe, the upper bay. So it's kind of your choice. They also have rental shops such as the Newport Aquatic Center, Southwind Kayak Center, and the one that is closed is Balboa Kayaks and Paddleboards. This one is run by a local family, is currently closed due to COVID, but when COVID is a little bit more under control, I do encourage you to go and check them out because it is run by a pretty nice family. Yeah, you will probably see people on other types of estuary-like boats there, but it's really neat to go in, and some of these places, even though it looks like it's land, you can just kind of skid over all of the grass reeds, and you can sometimes scare animals out of there. And I don't encourage scaring animals, but sometimes if you see a turtle or something come out of this, it's kind of neat. Thanks. Please don't intentionally scare the wildlife.
All right, and so the last area that we wanted to talk about, now kind of moving from the freshwater to the on the beach, is the ones that are really out there in the ocean, which is Catalina and the Channel Islands. So as Camille mentioned, you can paddle from the shore all the way out to Catalina Island, but you can also take tours or get kayaks at Catalina Island and see the area. The Channel Islands are also places that you can take tours of. I think I would generally recommend a tour of the Channel Islands rather than kind of exploring it out totally on your own, partially because they are just much harder to get to. It would be quite an adventure to paddle out there all by yourself. And so I've listed a couple of different guided tours that they have, as well as where you can rent your own kayaks from Catalina Island. But one of the really awesome things about Catalina Island and the Channel Islands is that they have these sea caves. So these sea caves are really cool. There's a couple that have openings that look like this, some of those that cave picture we first showed. So they're really fun to paddle through. The thing with out in the ocean is that you do have the tides to worry about. So some of them are very big and areas where it's easy to paddle through. Certainly if it's anything where it gets dark, I would avoid that or only go in with guides because people can get stuck in the caves and no one wants to end up in that situation. So while there's lots of really cool things around the Channel Islands and Catalina, do be aware of both the tides and the safety, since there is more opportunities for dangerous or sticky situations. Additionally, there is a ton of wildlife out there. So I've actually done most of my time in this area with scuba diving, but kayaking is another really awesome way, and honestly probably a lot warmer than scuba diving. Scuba diving is cold, but there's lots of seals, like these cute ones in the picture there. But there's also a great deal of sea stars, nudibranchs, and as Camille was mentioning, Garibaldi. So Garibaldi are these bright orange fish, and they like to scurry around everywhere. So one of the really great things about the Channel Islands is that they are all protected. So it's a very nice place. You do have to navigate some of the waves and the tides, but it's really a fantastic opportunity to see really great wildlife. And if you go in the right season, there are dolphins and gray whales, which is so awesome. So that's my 2 cents about the Catalina and Channel Islands. And we just got a question, which is, will we try to lead a kayaking trip ever? And the answer is hopefully after COVID. So we were hoping on running one this year, and that's not going to happen. But we would really love to lead a kayaking trip. So if you guys are interested in doing something like that, definitely feel free to either kind of reach out in the future or keep your eyes peeled, because we are hoping to, when it is safe and no longer at a risk, have something that is like a kayaking adventure. So that is pretty much all we have